And we're back for the next chapter with Pierre Jonker. Pierre, nice to see you once again. We, first of all, welcome once again.
Thanks, Steve. Always good to be here.
We spoke about our time up to the end of Okankolo. So effectively, we had been on the border for 6 months. We hadn't seen much action, but we'd been in Angola. There'd been lots of shenanigans. One thing we omitted about Okankolo was, I think Stan's section hit a landmine there with their buffle. So other platoons have other experiences. They have yes. Different tale to tell. One or two of them might have had contacts, but just for our experience, yeah. So by the end of that sort of 6 months, I was thinking, are we ever going to have a full-on contact with the enemy? Well, don't. What's the saying? You get what you wish for, huh? Because certainly Alpha Tower was now the apex experience for us, where there was a lot of stuff happening in the bush with the enemy. Yeah, so we headed on up to Alpha Tower.
That's it, yeah, Steve, and it was quite an eye-opener because it was just the tower, and I think there's a pump house below it and a fence, a rudimentary, well, there was a fence, like a 6-foot fence with some barbed wires along the top of it. And there were a couple of tents. The one was GVR's tent. There was the tent that the balsaka and stuff was stored in, which I think the guys also slept in occasionally, the officers. And I think Moose had his own tent. And on top of the tower, we had a mag and a radio. And it certainly was very different from what we'd experienced at Okatope and at Okankolo, in the sense that it was active. There was stuff happening there all the time. And what I think it did, it got us out of that lethargy and the doldrums we'd fallen in, and actually the platoons all sharpened up, because you knew that the chances of bumping into somebody were very, very good. Because also, again, we were now closer to the cut line. We were on the cut line, and if they had come through without external ops, they hadn't bumped into any South African forces on the way down. So they were also quite fresh and frisky when they came through there. So yeah, I think we did. There were a number of incidents, and I believe I think the one that, apart from the attack on the tower itself, which we can do after this, is that there was one that occurred at night along the main road, if I'm right.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, just before you get to that, what had happened looking back is that the army had deliberately pushed us further and further northwards. So after 6 months of patrolling, we were now experienced conscripts. We were Omana. We had been bush hardened, and they positioned us right on the cut line, on the border with Angola, between the two countries, where, as you say, there was this water tower, and it was also rainy season. So the guerrillas infiltrated. There was a lot of wet water around Shaunas, and it made tracking them more difficult. And that corridor, that north-south running corridor through which they infiltrated the most number of enemy, was around the Alpha Tower area, sort of Alpha Tower and eastwards. So yeah, we walked right into the thick of it. Yeah, and there were numerous contacts. This is my diary from the time, and I actually wrote fairly little in the diary because we just seemed to be involved in so much, And I drew a rudimentary map over here, and there are red flashes on the map. And at each flash, if I count them, there's like 14 or 15 of them. And that was a contact that we had. We were only there for 2 months. So I guess that's a fair amount of action in 2 months. And then I did a description of each of the contacts in the remaining pages. So it's interesting looking through this. All of the 5 platoons were having their own experiences with the enemy. I forget what our first one. I think it was the one you were referring to on the tar road on the other side of the border in Angola. Yeah, it was 14 February. I wrote that down. I remember it being Valentine's Day, and I actually don't remember much about about that contact. Yeah, I've got a very scant description, but it was late afternoon, the sun was going down, and we were walking to a place we had identified where we'd sleep that night, a TV. And then these guerrillas started following us. We were walking in a long extended file. And the back section, section 3, our section, we dropped down, and we now went into a classic battle plan, which we had rehearsed many times back in training, where we now ambushed them. Your 2 sections went on. I think one section went around on a flanking side. Paul Einstein was our lieutenant, our new lieutenant. Hell of a character. What's that sign?
L shape, L ambush.
An L
ambush.
But I remember they walked right into us, and they were close, they were right here. And by then it was dusk. It was quite dark. And the bullets started flying, and it was long grass. And I immediately went down and rolled, searching for cover to get behind, and I couldn't find any. So I was left lying in long grass. And to my right-hand side was the light machine gun being operated by Dukkies Jordan. And Brent was the one-liner in charge of them. And they ran out of bullets. We were just pouring fire across, and it felt as though the enemy fire was pretty low as well above our heads. Bad cover, as I say. They started running out of ammunition. So that was when Brent jumped up instinctively, and he ran across the line of fire back to where you guys were somewhere. And he went and got more belts for the machine gun, and then returned, with all the firing going on. I was struck at the time how brave that was. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you would expect people to do in that situation. But until you're in that situation with bullets flying around, you don't really know how you're going to react. It was certainly very fearful. It was the first full go that we were having at one another. And then you guys, was it your section or another one which came around the side and opened fire, and we sort of did an L ambush on them?
It was us. It was section 2. Yeah, I believe Paul was with us as well.
Okay.
I believe. Because, yeah, so you were shooting in this direction,
yeah,
and then we actually did this.
Yeah.
But I think you guys were taking more of the fire because that's who initiated the contact with these guys. So it took them a little while before they turned weapons on us, but I think it faded very quickly after that. They just melted away.
Combined with the fire, the mortar started launching.
Because they threw the looms, and
yes.
Stan's platoon was up the road, further to the north, and he ran up with the section, I believe, or to try and see what the situation is, or try and help out. But those loom canisters were popping above our heads almost.
Yeah,
you hear the whirring sound as those empty canisters came down.
Absolutely, I remember that vividly.
Listen to the
fireworks display.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's when Wayne Shannon, who stands radio up, got on the radio, and he shouted at the tower to stop, not to throw HE, because if they did, the HE would probably be impacting very close to them, initially anyway. So they didn't throw HE or much.
And then that sort of died down, and then we received the instruction, our section, to stand up and move through the killing ground. And the killing ground, it transpired, was over a road, I think, which was just behind.
Yeah.
We now by now it was dark, and we now faced the situation of having to walk through the area where the enemy had been. And this now cross-references to something I said way back, where we've been taught not to do that. But the Israeli paratrooper discussion that we had.
Yeah.
I was very, very uncomfortable about that. And we just got across the road. We scampered across the road when they opened fire again. I think that's what happened. It was all a bit confusing to me. And then more fire broke out there, and there seemed to be a battle going on 2 fronts, and we were caught in the middle of it, and I was virtually out of ammunition. And it was all very exciting, and the adrenaline was just pumping, And eventually, I think we gathered that the enemy had either withdrawn or it kind of came to an end. And so we withdrew back across the road. We all regrouped, and then we walked off to our TV to go to bed. But I just remember remember that night lying in my sleeping bag in the bush, looking up at the stars and next to Dave Lee, and his eyes were like saucepans, you know. We had that adrenaline pumping through our veins, and it was impossible to sleep that night. And then, of course, the next day we went back now to look for bodies and so on, but we couldn't find any. We were very disappointed. Yeah. So that was the first sort of incident that we were involved in. And then in quick succession around us, all over, north of the Cup Lane, south of the Cup Lane, guys were hitting their own contacts. You know, do you remember some of the other incidents the other guys had?
Well, you know, I remember the waterhole incident, which I think teased the guys. And again,
platoon 3, that was Stan's platoon, eh?
Yes, and if we were in their shoes, you know, so it's easy to joke around it, but you know, the guys survived that and went through it. I think a few days after that, we actually patrolled past it. We saw the whole thing, where it had taken place, and we also found this baobab tree that had a house carved in it. We were told that because baobab trees can hollow out. We were told there was intelligence saying that they would hide ammunition and weapons in this, and we were quite chuffed about that. And that night in the TB, I just handed over watch to Heinz Swart. And I'd been back in my sleeping bag for 5 minutes, and he fired 3 or 4 shots. So I crawled over to him and I said, what is this? Now everybody's awake, you know, obviously, but nobody else is. We're just waiting. And he said, no, there was a dark form. He saw this thing coming in towards the TB, so he fired. So I said, okay. So I stayed on watch with him for that period that he was on watch. And then we handed it over to the other guys. And I think I stayed with them for a little while. I went to sleep. Next morning, there were dog tracks around. So you'd seen this. But by that stage, you know, you were so sharp and you didn't want to take any chances. Yeah. And then the other one, I can't remember.
Sorry, Pierre. Sorry, may I hold you there? Because I just want to talk about that waterhole incident. So what happened there was they had got to a waterhole, which was a deep pit. And it appears that quite a few of the guys were in the waterhole refilling their water bottles when the enemy opened fire, ambushed them at the top there. And we, of course, made a huge joke about it because many of them ended up in the waterhole treading water. Their rifles were at the top. And to this day, we rag those guys about it. But it must have been terrifying. But the guys up there managed to return fire with their machine gun, and someone was hit by shrapnel, and no one was killed. But I remember that was quite a scary incident that they went through. Yeah. Anyhow, moving on. So you were going to talk about another. No,
sorry, just to get I think it was Ron Adrianatos who got injured.
That's right. An RPG was an RPG that hit the tree, and he got shrapnel. Yeah. He got
shrapnel. Yeah.
That's right.
No, that's right. Yeah. So that's just, and then the other one, they would. Well, it all rolled on from that whole day. We done that, and we afterwards subsequently found out it was actually classified as external op. The whole company went down the cut line, and we were going to put down a stop of stoppers for 701, I believe, that was sweeping down from the north of 32.
Yeah.
With that, and on our left, can't remember which platoon it was, had hit the contact. We were already up and walking, and it was a drizzly morning. It's like a grey, drizzly morning. And they hit the contact, and we heard this. And we came over the rise. It was like a sloping Mahanga field going down this way, and the 3 guys were walking across our front. And
yes, I remember that, Pierre. It was a Sunday morning at about 7 o'clock.
That's 100%, Steve. So we opened fire, and Fandy and Oldham, I don't remember Oldham's first name, they got so excited they were playing 60s with the Patmore, but they forgot to fuse them because it's fortunate because some of that stuff landed amongst us.
Yes.
But what happened after that, they dropped a lot of equipment. Dave picked up a cap.
Yes.
And where we found our layup position for the stop group, there was this massive tree, and the guys took turns climbing in the tree and just seeing if they could see anything. Dave was up there, and I was monitoring the radios. I had the 853, and I just heard the thing go get keyed, and the guy said, "Signor."
Okay.
And the answer is, "Yeah, he's sitting in the room." And I said to Dave, turn your head. And he turned his head, and the guy said, "I no net say Corporal Christ, get the fuck out the tree. Because I only saw the silhouette, obviously, and they hadn't spotted, these were the 702 or 701 officers talking to each other.
Okay.
And they were going to earmark Dave for some lead. Yeah, I remember that. And I think he still may have that cap. We spoke about that here and I, not long ago.
I remember
that's sort of
straight after that contact, as the firing came to an end, I remember Dave, he got up, he was next to me, and he walked 2 meters forward and he picked up the cap. And the guys that scampered right past us, they came past us so quickly. Man, they were literally running for their lives. They came past us so fast that they would have won any Olympic Games sprint, you know. And even with us opening fire immediately, they got away. It was unbelievable. So if I look at all these contacts, you know, there was Platoon 4, which I think was Dave Bosman's platoon. You know, they had a contact on 12 February. It was just before us. They walked into 6 to 10 enemy. Corporal Katsia opened fire first. Follow-ups, we were in those follow-ups. Platoon 3 ambushed. SAP base ambushed. Platoon 2 company had a contact 4 March. Walked into 7 enemy. You know, there are lots of these things. It litters the reports here. There is this one sad incident, which was where Kili Fourie was hit by the RPG.
Yes,
I remember that so clearly. That was a really sad day because he was such a good kid. You know, he had been with us right from the beginning in basics. He was a driver, and he was in our platoon. He was our platoon driver, and he was a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, everybody's friend. He used to play that squash box, that concertina.
Trekklavier.
Yeah, and which was, you know, it was nice when you were a long way from home at night in base to hear him play that thing. It was very melancholic and would make us think of home. He was a nice kid. He was from Oudtshoorn, right? And so he lost his leg. And was really badly wounded. It was nice to make contact with him many years later, but by then he was very, very ill and he passed away, unfortunately. Barry and I spoke to him. Barry saw quite a lot of him. I don't know if you had come into the group. Did you speak to him later on in life?
I didn't speak to Kili, no, but I just got back from New Zealand, I think, when this was all happening, and I think he had maybe a week or something left. So I didn't get to go and see him because he was in hospital up here in Pretoria, in Joburg area, because I know Barry spent a lot of time, and a lot of credit to Barry for doing that, because it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. No. It was very sad. I remember we were terribly sad. And then, of course, we had the big attack on Alpha Tower, you know, which has been much documented. We've made various audios about it, and it's been much spoken about. It's become a bit of the folklore around the border now. You know, they have these Facebook groups and other social media things, and I see people referring to this attack on Alpha Tower. And I've heard guys describing it, and they weren't even there. You know, I mean, I know they weren't there because I was there. And so we've spoken a hell of a lot about that. There's probably no point in rehashing that whole thing, but they caught us by surprise, 1 o'clock in the morning. I was at Alpha Tower. I was sleeping in the perimeter fence. You guys were out in the bush, and so we had this attack, which was the real deal. Yeah, Pierre, just looking back on that, for me, that was an extremely frightening moment. You know, I had gone off to the army all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, wanting to experience combat. Well, yeah, now I got it, you know. But it wasn't of the nature that I expected it to be. I was trapped. I couldn't move. I had a fence behind me. We were being heavily mortar bombed. My biggest fear was the mortar bombs, which were landing right in front of me, and then right behind me, and then appeared to be landing on either side. And to my right over here, guys were being hit. Herald and the Sergeant Major RPG hit the tent, and you know, a lot happened that night, and we had a lot of bravery that night. Eventually the guys staged a fight back. It was pretty impressive, you know. They how we pulled ourselves together in a very difficult situation, because of course we had platoons sleeping in the bush, and the officers and the NCOs weren't with their platoons. They were sleeping at the tower. So the guys were out there on their own, and they had to get themselves together and start firing back. And we had the enemy firing on multiple fronts around us. And everybody has a story about that night. It was really exciting. But yeah, look, for me, it was extremely scary. You know, I thought my end had come. I reached a point where I was lying in the sand, and the machine gun fire was raking so close above our heads, and then also being aimed upwards at the tower. And this whole lot was going on, and the mortar bombs, the goddamn mortar bombs. And I lay there and I thought, this is it, you know, goodbye world. And it was overwhelming. There were quite a few guys that night who found it a very overwhelming experience. We've spoken about that. Some guys cracked, you know, they couldn't continue after that. At one point, I put my hands behind my head and I put my face in the sand like this, and I waited for a mortar bomb to land between my shoulder blades. And I remember very clearly how at that point, when I had given up, I thought of only one thing. Only one thing came to my mind, and that was my mother. Strange, eh? You know, you had guys who had been in other incidents, shot and so on, calling out for their mothers at the end. And that instinctively, that experience sort of overwhelmed me. I could only think of her and how sad she would be now that I was dead, and that she would get the phone call. And I just felt deeply upset about her, and hoped that she would cope after I was gone. It was really horrible, you know. So yeah, I think that experience for me, I got what I had wished for, you know. I felt pretty much after that, like, I don't want to go through this again. We managed to get out there with alive. And shame, some guys had a huge contact 10 days before, you know, guys like Pierre and Peter says he was there. He couldn't believe he was in the same damn thing twice within 10 days. They'd been ambushed, I think, at the waterhole, Peter and them. And then, so you guys came in late, early next morning, I think, about 5 o'clock, you came in, because the attack had happened at 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember you coming in, and then we were ordered to do follow-ups, right? And we went east towards St. Mary's Mission School. What was that St. Mary's place? I could never quite work out.
If I'm right, it was run by Lutherans, and they were completely anti-apartheid, you know, and they even had the famous Black Jesus,
yes,
on the wall.
The statue,
because
sort of effigy.
Yeah, the statue.
Yeah.
Yes, and they didn't want, and we weren't allowed to go onto their grounds, because we tried to keep the peace, and they were quite vehement about the South Africans being racist and being illegal occupiers of the land. But the other side to us is that they would scream for help if any of their kids were abducted, and kids were abducted from that mission and from many other missions along the Owamboland, close to the border.
Yeah,
with Angola, because that's how SWAPO, they basically press gang, and they comfort women, if you want to call them, young girls. So we were.
Is that
not really?
Is that what I never thought that, or I never thought through that, you know? But yeah, it was a difficult thing with all those abductions.
Not all of them. I mean, yeah. I mean, I take the term comfort woman from what the Japanese called the Dutch women that they put in, and any of the others, Chinese, Indonesian, put them into their brothels. They were comfort women. But anyway, just to go back quickly to Alpha before we go to St. Mary's. Yeah, we were 3 k's away, Steve. Yeah, and the first inkling we had was I felt the ground shaking. 3 kilometers away, I could feel it shaking.
Wow.
The impact of those 82s, I think, 81s.
Could you?
And then I rolled over onto my back.
Pierre, could you see it from 3 kilometers away?
Oh, yeah. I rolled over because this is how I slept in the operation area. And I'm told afterwards that was stress position on my arms like this. I would wake up and I'd be dead. Anyway, so I was sleeping on my, and I rolled over, and there was this very impressive fireworks display. You could see red, well, predominantly initially green tracer from their side, and then the red started coming in, and then you could see the flashes. You couldn't see them because of the cover, the tree of the covers, but you could see like a lightning strike behind a tree, almost, low down.
Yeah.
You just see these flashes happening, and they were all of one sound initially, also, but then when the counter bombardment started, you could hear it starting to kick in, and then it faded first from their side, and then from the tower's side. Yeah. We were ordered to saddle up and come into the tower, but it took us quite a long while to do it. So we came in late, actually, I think relatively late in the morning, but almost immediately. I think all we did was get rats, and we were then told to move out. And as you said, Steve, we were sleeping near the 3K dam, those dams.
Yep.
And so we'd been sleeping there. So we went out towards that side, and St. Mary's was further down the cut line. And we found those bomb bandages and discarded ampules at the 3K dam. And so we moved on further to St. Mary's, and we actually got permission. Then I think Berede were also in the area. Yeah. Got permission to search St. Mary's.
Yeah, it took us a long time to get permission to search there, because it was some sort of Red Cross or international. There was a lot of sensitivity. There were a lot of tracks going into St. Mary's, which was a school complex with a church. And we stood for ages at the gate while the powers that be waited to let us go in. And then we went in.
We went in, yeah. And I know you and Dave were involved in the incident. I don't know how Dave ended up with you all that time, because Blixen was in my section. So I need to talk to him about this. But anyway, the point is we were allowed to go into the buildings. And I know the priests weren't very happy, but we split up duty, and we went through and ended up in the kitchen. And again, to my great discredit, but I was very thirsty, hungry, and tired, there was a single can of Fanta Orange in the fridge. I drank it. But again, it's like the anger of the helplessness we felt the night before. Yeah. It was terrible, because it's your mates are there. Yeah. So all that, again, it boils over to, but it didn't boil over into the same sort of violence or force that was used at Okatope, because I think we also realized.
Yeah, the guys were angry. There was also an incident around that time where a couple of the enemy wandered into a TV. I think it was Dave Bosman's platoon, and they just opened fire. And there was a lot of anger about that. The guys were wounded and so on. Yeah, a lot happened there, Pierre, at Alpha Tower. It really, as I said before, was the apex. Yeah.
And then I don't know if you just want to touch quickly. There were like the two incidents. I know you and Dave saw something in one of the classrooms in St. Mary's. And then just the last before you get onto that is like the Berede guys were with us, but they also, one of their platoons, I think it was just before we moved out from the tower, hit Palm's Heads up further north. And I remember most of those horses coming streaming back past the camp going south with no riders on them. And it was quite amazing to see. And I just thought to myself again, as with the bikes, well, the Berede is better, but I wouldn't want to be. I love being on my feet. I didn't want to be in a rattle. I didn't want to be on horseback. I'd rather be on my feet. But
so much was happening, man. And the Berede guy arrived on their horses. They, as you say, I think they hit 2 Pomzets. 2 horses were hit and had to be
put down.
And the riders were quite badly injured. I actually, by chance, came across one of the guys who had been there 1 or 2 years ago. We had a chat about it. It was a bad incident for them. At the same time, Koevoet arrived, and they were blundering around in the bush, and they hit a landmine in the midst of all this. So now we had all these injured Koevoet lying over there. There were sort of incidents happening, and then Dave Bosman's platoon ran into some other guys down the cup lane. It was just, man, I remember the bush being alive with explosions from all around, with contacts breaking out, a landmine going off, and APs going off, and Yeah, Dave and I had a bit of a non-incident in that school there. We found one of the guys, and I've spoken about it at length on the other series, and he managed to evade us. You know, we were in a classroom, and I didn't want to open fire in the classroom where the kids were there. Yeah, it was once again a very dark period, but it was also, I mean, it was the real deal for us. You know, I felt that we had found our war at Alpha Tower. Those of us who had been searching for it. A lot going on, and a lot of courage shown by our guys and by the enemy, I must say, who were being infiltrating down that corridor from the camps in Angola. And I felt by the time the end of Alpha Tower came, which was towards the end of March or so, 1983, that, yeah, we had had quite a war by then. We'd had 9 months in the bush, and with the final period, chapter up until the end of those 9 months, very intense for us. And it's a period that we when we get together, our platoon guys and the other guys in the company, we remember with a lot about, and we speak a lot about it. Yeah, Pierre, yeah, I think that's pretty much, you know, all I have to say about Alpha Tower. Perhaps we want to bring that one to an end, unless you have anything more you want to round off with.
No, Steve, I think you've hit the nail right on the head. It's and it's quite interesting, the comment you made about us being moved further north as our experience grew. I think we did find out. Well, I think we acquitted ourselves reasonably well, despite some of the anger and some of the incidents that occurred. And I think it also gelled us for life, bonded us for life in a much larger sense. Those 3 months there, in a much larger sense than if we'd spent another 6 months doing Okankolo, Okatope stuff.
Yeah,
I don't think, you know, there is a bond that exists, and it goes around the 4th of March 1983, a lot of it. But as you say, it's almost exclusively, if we get together, we talk Alpha Tower.
Yeah.
So it does feature large in all our lives, and I think we can look back with a lot of pride on those days there. And you know, I'm chuffed to have done it with people like yourself and the rest of the guys. You know, there's it was good in a bad way. I can put it that way. But yeah, that's about it.
Very good way of putting it. It was good in a bad way. And perhaps we can later on, we still have 1 3-month trip to talk about, and then we're going to reflect on all of that. And perhaps we'll say more then about how the whole experience was good in a bad way and bad in a good way. We'll elaborate on that a bit. But for now, Pierre, yeah, another great segment tonight chatting to you. Thanks for all those memories. It's really very nice to be able to talk candidly about these things. And thanks for giving up your time and getting this down digitally for the future. I hope that in the future there are people who will find it interesting, of this war that we conscripts went through. We weren't special forces, we weren't any of these big heroic guys, and yet I found amongst you guys, amongst, you know, many of the men around me, there was a lot of bravery and courage and heroism, and which really I think is why our army in that period of time was regarded as a very good fighting army. You know, from a military perspective, it was I'm very proud to have served with you guys. So thanks very much, and we'll chat the next segment sometime soon.
Great, Steve. Thanks for having me, and it's been wonderful digging up all these memories through the three chats we've had so far. It's been great. I look forward to the last one. We can wrap it up and parcel it up nicely for the future generations to enjoy.
Good. All right then, Pierre. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers, Steve.